My name is Ethan Clark. I'm 28 years old, and at my brother's wedding, I was assigned a folding chair taped outside the restroom while the bride smirked. Only important guests sit inside. My mother leaned in with perfume and pity and whispered, "Just be grateful you were invited." The chandelier light bled down the hallway, the disinfectant sting in the air, my name curling on a piece of scotch tape as muffled vows drifted through the door. I felt something cold click into place behind my ribs. A switch I'd ignored for years. But what they didn't know was I'd already started keeping receipts. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. My earliest memory of being invisible was at a birthday party. I was 6. My brother David was 8. The kitchen smelled of chocolate frosting and smoke from the candles that lined his cake. Everyone crowded around him, cheering, cameras flashing as he leaned forward to blow them out. I remember clutching a small toy car in my hand, a gift I had saved my allowance to buy for him. I thought it would make him smile. When I held it out, my mom nudged me aside so she could get a clear photo of David with the cake. In the picture that ended up in our family album, I'm just a blur in the corner, half cut off. My hand stretched forward with the car. Nobody noticed when I slipped it onto the pile of gifts and walked away. That night, I sat on my bed turning over the thought that maybe I was too quiet to be seen. I swallowed it, but it carved deeper than I knew. The pattern followed me into school years. At my middle school science fair, I won second place with a project I'd built from scratch, charting the way light bends through different liquids. The cafeteria smelled of glue and hot dogs, kids buzzing around their poster boards. When the judges handed me a ribbon, I felt a rare swell of pride. But when I turned to show my parents, only my sister Anna was there, clapping politely. Mom and Dad had left early to get David to his basketball practice. Later at dinner, they asked him how the game went, never once asking me about my project. I kept the ribbon folded in my desk drawer, and when I looked at it weeks later, the paper already had creases, like it was tired of being remembered. I didn't know it then, but this would matter later. Vacations told the same story. One summer we went to Florida. Sunblock stung my eyes as we lugged beach chairs across the sand. In the photos from that trip, David is front and center, holding a surfboard, tanned and smiling. Anna is beside him in a bright sundress. And me, I was always the one behind the camera. Dad would hand it to me, "Ethan, you've got the steady hands." So the albums show everyone but me. Years later, scrolling through the photos on a family slideshow, Sophie, the woman who would become David's wife, pointed at the absence and laughed. "Were you even there?" "Ethan," everyone chuckled. I forced a smile, but inside something cracked. I realized that even proof of my presence had been erased. The trip might as well have been theirs alone. Money was another invisible tether. In high school, I saved every dollar from tutoring neighborhood kids in algebra. My plan was to buy a new set of books I'd been eyeing at the mall. But one evening, Mom came into my room, eyes tired, voice soft. "We're short on the electricity bill this month. Could you help?" I handed her the envelope without hesitation. A week later, Dad patted David on the shoulder at dinner and said, "Glad you're stepping up for this family, son." David grinned, not correcting him. My voice died in my throat. That refrain, "Ethan, just be grateful," echoed in the silence. Christmas carried its own sting. Snow pressed against the windows, the smell of pine needles heavy in the living room. David tore into a brand new laptop. Anna squealed over jewelry, and I unwrapped a sweater 2 sizes too big. It was on sale, Mom said cheerfully. Already turning back to watch David set up his new gadget, I pulled the fabric over my head, sleeves hanging past my hands. I smiled like it didn't matter, but the wool scratched my skin all night. A reminder that, even in giving, they had barely looked at me. I didn't know it back then, but that scratch would resurface years later as a burn. Thanksgiving wasn't better. Turkey and gravy smells filled the dining room. Laughter bouncing off the walls. Uncle Jerry loved telling one story more than any other: how David once saved me when I locked myself out of the house at 10. He's always looked out for Ethan, he'd say. Glass raised. Everyone nodding like it was gospel. What no one remembered was that I had actually climbed in through the basement window on my own. Scraped my knee raw. David just happened to be standing nearby when I stumbled inside. The scar on my knee still tingles in the cold. They never saw it. They never asked. And every time Jerry told that story, it carved deeper. I swallowed it again, letting the lie become family history. College years should have been my chance to break free. I studied data science. Long nights in computer labs, smelling of burnt coffee and overheated servers. I graduated quietly, diploma in hand, while David's business degree came with balloons and banners. At my ceremony, Mom clapped politely, but I saw her glancing at her watch, eager to leave for David's celebratory dinner across town. My picture on graduation day is me alone on the lawn, cap slightly crooked, holding a rolled-up diploma. The edges of the photo blur where the wind caught it. Even then, I didn't know it. But that loneliness would come roaring back in a ballroom years later. Back then, I told myself it wasn't worth fighting. I buried the resentment under layers of patience. If you had asked me, I would have said I was fine, that every family has a favorite. But late at night, lying in my apartment with the hum of the fridge, the only sound, I felt the weight of every time I'd been sidelined. And the refrain repeated, Ethan, just be grateful. I thought I had learned to live with it. I thought being invisible was safer than being a problem. But every swallowed moment piled up, unseen, and I didn't know it back then. But those piles were waiting for a spark, waiting for a chandelier ballroom, a folding chair outside the restroom, a slideshow of humiliation to ignite everything I had buried. When I moved back home after college for a brief stretch, the old patterns returned faster than I expected. One winter morning, Dad asked me to help fix the family computer. The tower whined like a dying engine. The screen stuck on a blue error message. I spent 3 hours in the drafty living room, my hands numb from the cold air seeping through the old windows, reinstalling drivers, coaxing the machine back to life. By the time I got it running, David had come home from a gym session, still sweating in his hoodie. Dad clapped him on the back and said, "Thanks for calling your brother to help us out. Always thinking ahead." I opened my mouth, then closed it. My fingerprints were still warm on the keyboard. But in their story, I was erased. Again. I carried that silence upstairs, each step heavier than the last. Family dinners blurred together. The smells of roast chicken and garlic mashed potatoes should have been comforting, but they coated me with unease. Conversations orbited around David's achievements, his new promotion, his new apartment, his latest relationship. When I mentioned a project at my firm, Mom tilted her head sympathetically, like she was indulging a child talking about a hobby. "That's nice, Ethan," she'd say, then pivot back to David. Anna tried sometimes, tossing me a quick smile. But she was a ghost in those battles, slipping into jokes to defuse tension. I didn't hate her for it. I envied her ability to vanish before the storm hit. Christmas 2 years ago crystallized everything. Snow clung to the branches outside, lights twinkling in reds and greens. Under the tree, gifts were piled high. David unwrapped a new smartwatch, Anna a designer coat. My box was smaller, wrapped sloppily. Inside socks, thick wool socks, the kind you buy last minute at a drugstore. I pulled them over my hands, joking that maybe they'd keep my fingers warm on my walks to work. Laughter filled the room. Not at my joke, but at me. I smiled, though inside, I felt something start to freeze solid. Later that night, when the laughter died down and the house hummed with heaters, I sat by the window staring out at the snow. My reflection in the glass looked like a stranger. Blurred. Forgettable, I thought. Maybe this is my role. The background character in their story. I didn't know it back then, but that thought would come back to haunt me. It wasn't all big moments. Sometimes it was small cuts that drew the deepest blood. Like the family group chat. Photos of David's engagement. Videos of him proposing under fairy lights. Hearts and applause emojis flooding the thread. When I posted a picture from a weekend hike, 2 people liked it. One of them wasn't even family. It was a cousin's girlfriend who barely knew me. Another time, Mom forwarded an email thread meant for David, asking him to coordinate Thanksgiving. I wrote back politely, offering to help. She never replied. Weeks later, at the dinner, she thanked David for organizing, though I had been the one who set the table, who cooked half the sides. David raised his glass, and everyone toasted him. I lifted my water, the only one without wine in hand, and swallowed the bitterness like it was nothing. Even at work, the family's shadow followed me. Once, when Hannah, my colleague, stopped by my desk, she grinned and said, "Your brother's wedding is all over social media. Looks gorgeous. You must be proud." I forced a smile. Proud. That word tasted strange. Proud of a family that never once said they were proud of me. I tucked the bitterness away, nodding, playing along. Later, in the break room, I overheard 2 coworkers laughing about the slideshow. "Poor guy," one said. "I can't believe they actually showed that in front of everyone. They didn't know I was in the doorway. They didn't know I was the guy." My throat clenched. I slipped out silently before they could see. The truth is, humiliation wasn't new. I'd been rehearsing for it all my life. At my high school prom, David showed up late with his friends, crashing the event. The DJ gave him the mic, and he roasted me in front of the crowd, joking about my old car and my awkward dancing. People laughed. I laughed too, because that was my job, be the good sport. Afterward, when I confronted him quietly in the parking lot, he smirked. "Come on, Ethan. You know you'd be boring without me." I let him have the last word. That night, alone in my car, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles burned. I swallowed it, but that burn never faded. I remember one Thanksgiving when Colonel Evelyn Parker, an old family acquaintance, visited. She had served in the military, sharp and direct. During dinner, she asked about my work in data analytics. For once, I had the floor. I explained how I built models, how my team used them to prevent fraud in healthcare. The room was quiet, eyes on me. For a second, I felt visible. Then David cut in with a joke about how I was basically a human calculator. Laughter erupted, and the spotlight died. Colonel Parker's eyes lingered on me. Sympathetic, maybe even impressed. "That's important work," she said firmly, slicing through the noise. For a heartbeat, I felt seen. I didn't know it then, but remembering her words later would help me steady myself in darker moments. Sometimes, the cruelty came laced with sweetness. Like Mom, pressing a hand to my arm when I started to protest, whispering, "Don't embarrass us, Ethan. Just be grateful." Her voice was honey, but the sting was poison. I grew up internalizing that script. Don't embarrass us. Don't raise your voice. Don't disrupt the picture. Over time, I stopped trying. It was easier to vanish than to fight. Until the night of the wedding, when the picture itself turned into a weapon aimed straight at me. Looking back now, I see the trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to that ballroom. The birthday where my gift was ignored. The science fair where my ribbon went unseen. The vacations where I held the camera instead of being in the frame. The bills I paid with my own money, only to have the credit handed to David. The sweaters, the socks, the jokes at every table. Each moment was a seed, planted deep, watered with silence. And on the night of my brother's wedding, Every seed sprouted at once, choking me with vines I could no longer cut down quietly. I didn't realize at the time that each photograph, each overlooked gesture, each laugh at my expense was building a case, not just in my memory, but in the evidence I would later stack into a folder. Back then, I thought I was simply enduring. I didn't know I was collecting. I didn't know I was preparing for the day when patience would no longer be survival, but my sharpest weapon. By the time the wedding arrived, the stage had already been set. My role had already been written. They thought I would sit quietly in the hallway, clutching chicken fingers, watching through the crack of the door. But they didn't know the story I had been archiving all these years. They didn't know the invisible kid at the edge of every photograph had learned how to frame the picture himself. And as I sat in that ballroom hallway, the chandelier lights spilling onto the marble floor, just out of reach, I realized something my family never expected me to see. They had built the perfect witness, me. And when the time came, I would no longer be silent. I would be undeniable. The first blow landed before the ceremony even began. I followed the usher, expecting a table, a plate, maybe a candle centerpiece like everyone else. Instead, he stopped near a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach and air freshener, pointing to a single folding chair outside the restrooms. My name card was taped to the seat, as if it were an afterthought slapped on last minute. At first, I laughed under my breath, thinking maybe this was some prank, that someone would swoop in and say, "Kidding, Ethan, here's your real spot." But no one did. Guests filed past me in gowns and suits, their perfume trailing in the air, their place cards neatly displayed on linen-draped tables inside. I sat down in my lonely chair, the sound of flushing toilets breaking the illusion of celebration, and told myself to endure. But endurance felt different now. It scraped raw. When Sophie, the bride, glided past with her bridesmaids, sequins scattering light, she caught sight of me. Her smirk was sharp. "Only important guests sit inside," she said loudly enough for the hallway to hear. Her friends laughed, shrill and cruel. I clenched my jaw. My suit suddenly felt 2 sizes too small, suffocating against my chest. I thought about the espresso machine I'd bought, the handwritten card tucked inside. My gift was more thoughtful than most. Yet here I was, a punchline propped against a bathroom wall. I swallowed it, but something curdled in my stomach. I tried to salvage the evening during cocktail hour. Maybe I could drift among my cousins, hold a glass, pretend I belonged. At the bar, the bartender asked for my drink ticket. I stared blankly. "What ticket?" I asked. He tapped his own wrist. "Guests with the band only." I looked down, bare skin. No band. When I asked Mom, she sighed, irritated. They probably forgot. And honestly, "Ethan, do you really need to drink? You know how you get." Her words stung more than the rejection. How I get, as if sipping champagne would unravel me into chaos. I turned away empty-handed while glasses clinked all around me, toasts rising into laughter. I swallowed that too, but it lodged like glass in my throat. Dinner should have been refuge. But when I returned to my folding chair, a 12-year-old cousin was already sitting there, scrolling his phone with one hand and gnawing on breadsticks with the other. "Hey, that's my seat," I said gently. Without looking up, he shrugged. "Grandma said I could sit here. You weren't using it." My chair, the one already stripped of dignity, was now loaned to a child. Inside, the ballroom glowed with chandeliers, plates gleaming, forks chiming against porcelain. My spot had no silverware, no plate, no glass, nothing. When I asked Mom quietly, she frowned as if I'd created the problem. "They had to cut the guest list. You understand, right? It's not personal." But it felt personal. Every empty inch of that seat screaming rejection. Later, Someone handed me a plate of chicken fingers and fries from the kids' table, as if mocking the idea I deserved the same meal as adults. Grease pooled at the bottom, warm and humiliating in my hands. I swallowed again, but it burned. Then came the speeches. My father stood first, his voice breaking with pride. My son David has always been the golden boy of this family. Applause. Heads nodded. Eyes shifted toward me briefly, the unspoken contrast hanging heavy. I shrank into myself. Mom followed, lifting her glass. To Sophie, the daughter I always hoped for. And of course, Ethan is here too. Laughter rippled. My ears burned. Uncle Jerry chimed in, telling a story of how David once rescued me from being locked out of the house, making me sound like a helpless child eternally waiting for salvation. Even Anna, trying to lighten the mood, quipped that at least I got the best view near the restroom. It wasn't cruel, but it twisted like a knife anyway. I smiled weakly at each jab, my chest tight, the oxygen thinning. Swallowing now felt like drowning. By the time the DJ dimmed the lights for the slideshow, I braced myself for more Golden Boy glory. Instead, my name was called. Images flickered on the screen, me, with braces, me asleep on the couch, me sunburned and scrawny in an old swimsuit. Laughter erupted with every frame. Then the video, me in college, caught crying after a breakup, unaware of the camera. The room howled. My brother clutched the mic, wiping fake tears. We just wanted to show the real Ethan. Love you. Man. The applause that followed was thunder. My mom beamed. Wasn't that funny? I even picked some of the photos myself. Her words knocked the air out of me. My humiliation wasn't an accident. It was curated. I sat frozen, the laughter echoing like gunshots. My chest a battlefield of shame and fury. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I just went cold. Colder than I had ever been. Because in that ice, I felt something form a line that could never be crossed back. They thought they were breaking me down. But what they didn't see was the fracture becoming sharp, a weapon shaping itself in silence. After the slideshow ended, I slipped outside for air. The night was cool, sharp against my overheated skin. My chest rose and fell like I'd sprinted, though I hadn't moved. Through the window, I could still hear laughter, the muffled thump of music. For a long moment, I just stared at the stars above the parking lot, each one distant and unreachable, just like my place in this family. When I returned to my apartment later that night, the silence pressed hard. I dropped the carefully wrapped espresso machine on the counter like it was worthless. My phone buzzed a photo from the family group chat, David and Sophie clinking champagne. Captioned, "Best night ever." My aunt chimed in, "Owen left early. Didn't he?" Mom's reply stabbed. "He's always been sensitive. We'll talk to him later." No apology. No recognition. Just dismissal. I sat on the kitchen floor surrounded by old photos pulled from a box, birthdays where David blew out candles while I held the cake, vacations where I wasn't even in the frame because I was the one taking the pictures, my high school graduation, where my parents beamed at David for being the supportive brother, while I clutched my diploma in silence. Each memory landed like a bruise, darker and deeper than the last. I thought I'd buried these slights. I hadn't. They were bones under thin soil. And tonight the storm had unearthed them. The days after the wedding blurred. At work, I forced a smile, but whispers followed me. One coworker, Hannah, leaned over my desk. "Heard you were the star of the wedding slideshow. Guess you're famous now." She laughed. My stomach twisted so violently I excused myself, gripping the steering wheel of my car in the parking lot until my knuckles ached. My humiliation had spread beyond family. It was public now. A joke passed around in offices, in texts, in whispers. Weeks passed. I tried distance, ignoring group chat messages, avoiding calls, but somehow they always found ways to remind me of my role. My mom left a voicemail, Ethan. Can you help us with the Wi-Fi? David's too busy. My brother texted, can you watch my dog this weekend? Each message carried the same undertone, you exist to serve us. I said no, again and again. But their surprise at my refusal was almost comical. They didn't understand that something had shifted, that I wasn't playing the same part anymore. Then came the twist, the one that turned my anger into steel. A letter arrived at my apartment, the kind with an official bank logo in the corner. At first, I thought it was junk, but when I tore it open, I froze. It was a quarterly statement for an account with my name, attached a joint account I barely remembered signing years ago, when Mom said the bank needed an extra signature for a routine loan. The numbers blurred, then sharpened. Transactions labeled wedding expenses. Thousands drained the venue, the caterer, the florist, even the slideshow company. I called the bank, my voice steady but my pulse slamming. Mr. Doyle. The clerk pulled up the details. Yes, Mr. Clark. As a co-signer, your name is on the account. Legally, you share responsibility. He read off every withdrawal, each one a nail in the coffin of my patience. I thanked him politely, hung up, and sat staring at the wall. They hadn't just humiliated me. They'd used my money to pay for the privilege. The betrayal settled heavy, colder than rage. I pictured Mom's smile as the slideshow played, David's chuckle into the microphone, Sophie's smirk at my hallway chair, and realized I'd funded all of it. My humiliation wasn't only endorsed by them, it was financed by me. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid awake staring at the ceiling, the statement clutched in my hand. My jaw locked tight. I wasn't crying anymore. The sadness had burned off, leaving only something harder, sharper. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the afterthought. I was the fuse they'd lit without knowing. And deep down, I knew one thing with terrifying clarity: they thought they had destroyed me. But they had just handed me the weapon I needed. The family dinner came on a damp spring evening. The air smelled of rain, though none had fallen yet. I parked in front of my parents' house, the same house where I'd spent my childhood learning. That silence kept the peace. The windows glowed warm, inviting. But I knew better. Warmth didn't live here. It was staged. Inside, the dining room table was already crowded. China plates gleamed under the chandelier. Crystal glasses clinked as relatives laughed. The sound too polished, too rehearsed. My mother's voice floated above it all, honeyed and sharp. So glad we could all be together tonight. She kissed my cheek lightly, like she was greeting a neighbor, not her son. I sat near the middle, close enough to hear everything, far enough to watch them without being trapped at the head. My folder rested against my leg, heavy, its edges biting into my palm. Dinner began with the usual charade, Uncle Jerry telling exaggerated stories, David and Sophie beaming like royalty at their court, my father nodding with pride, Anna twirling her fork in silence. I barely tasted the roast chicken on my plate. My ears roared with the hum of anticipation, like the static before a storm. Dessert arrived: cheesecake, sliced neatly. My mom raised her glass. To family, she said. Everyone echoed. Glasses chimed. That was my moment. I placed the folder on the table with a quiet thud. The sound sliced through conversation. Heads turned. Forks paused midair. I have something I'd like to share, I said, my voice low, steady. David smirked. This isn't one of your dramatic speeches, is it? I didn't look at him. I pushed the folder toward the center. These are bank statements, from the joint account you had me sign before your wedding. Silence fell so sharp it almost rang. My father leaned forward. What are you talking about? Read them, I said. David opened the folder with a casual flick, but his expression tightened as his eyes scanned the first page. He flipped another, then another, his knuckles whitening on the paper. Sophie leaned in, her lip curling. So what? So what? I repeated, voice cutting. Every transaction is there. Venue deposit, catering, photographer, flowers, even that slideshow you all laughed at. Uncle Jerry chuckled nervously. Come on, Ethan. No one cares about a few dollars. It wasn't a few dollars. I fixed him with a look that shut him up instantly. It was tens of thousands, pulled from an account with my name on it. Which means legally, I was liable. Mom set her fork down carefully, as though sudden movement might shatter the room. Ethan, you know we would have paid you back. When I asked, because it's been months. Not a cent. Not even an acknowledgement. You didn't just humiliate me. You made me pay for it. My words landed heavy. No yelling. Just fact. Cold. Undeniable. David snapped the folder shut. This is ridiculous. We'll sort it out later now. I slid another paper across the table. The one with Rachel Moore's letterhead. This is a formal repayment request drafted by my attorney. You have 30 days to return the full balance. Plus interest. If not, I file a lawsuit. Anna's fork clattered onto her plate. My aunt coughed to break the tension. But no sound could soften the edges of what I'd just laid down. Sophie scoffed. You wouldn't actually, I would. My gaze pinned her in place. Because I'm done being your punchline. I'm done being the family ATM. And I'm done being told to be grateful for scraps. The room was frozen. Even the clock on the wall seemed to tick quieter. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Ethan, let's be reasonable. This is reasonable. I said. You always told me not to embarrass the family. Consider this the opposite. I'm giving you the chance to fix it privately. David opened his mouth. But Mom touched his arm. Her eyes, for the first time, looked unsure. We'll discuss it, she said. You have 30 days. I reminded them, pushing my chair back. The scrape of wood on tiles sounded like thunder. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and nodded once. Thanks for dinner. No one moved to stop me. No one dared. As I walked to the door, the silence pressed against my back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't small, wasn't invisible. I was the storm they never saw coming. Outside, the night air was cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of earth before rain. I breathed deep, steady. In the window's reflection, I caught my own face calm, eyes cold, lips curved in the faintest smile. It wasn't joy. It wasn't triumph. It was something sharper. The knowledge that everything had shifted. That the balance of power at that table would never be the same again. I didn't drive straight home that night. Instead, I parked 2 blocks away, under a flickering street lamp, and sat with the engine off. The folder still sat on the passenger seat, even after laying it down in front of them. I felt its weight, as if the paper itself carried every insult, every backhanded comment, every laugh at my expense. They thought they'd cornered me into silence all these years. But silence is a weapon if you know how to use it. My phone buzzed with messages, 3 from Mom, 2 from David, 1 from Dad, all unread. I powered it off. The quiet was sweeter, cleaner, at home. I laid the folder on my desk and began organizing. Every statement, every screenshot, every email was lined up in order. I added sticky notes with dates, cross-references, bold red arrows. It wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was ammunition. In the bottom drawer, I slid the folder next to a flash drive. That drive held copies of the slideshow from the wedding, yes, the humiliating one. A friend from work had found it circulating online and sent it to me. You might want this, she'd said. She had no idea how right she was. Bank statements, lawyer's letter, group chat screenshots, the slideshow. Together, they were more than evidence. They were leverage. And leverage, I realized, was the only language my family truly understood. For now, I wouldn't use it. I didn't need to. The repayment plan was already in motion. Their panic fresh. Their silence louder than any apology. But just knowing I had it, knowing I could drop everything into the world with a single email, gave me a calm I'd never felt before. I looked around my apartment. The quiet hum of the refrigerator. The steady city lights outside the window. For years, I'd felt small, cornered, invisible. Tonight, I felt steady, solid. They wanted the real Ethan. That's what David had said into the microphone, laughing with his bride and all their friends. The goofy one, the awkward one, the family embarrassment. But the real Ethan wasn't a joke. He was the man who learned to wait, to watch, to collect receipts. And when the moment came, he didn't shout. He pressed down a single folder and changed the room forever. They thought the slideshow was the end of the story. They didn't know it was just the beginning. If you've ever been pushed to the edge by the very people who should have had your back, then you know exactly how I felt that night. For years, I stayed quiet, laughed it off, played the good sport. But silence only works until it doesn't. Now I've drawn the line. And I'm not stepping back. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit that subscribe button. This story isn't over. And trust me, when the next chapter comes, you'll want to see exactly how it plays out.